Welcome back to Cat's Cast, the bi-weekly podcast featuring local interviews, arts and culture, and sustainability in the Catskill Mountains and Hudson Valley.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, beautiful.
Oh, that's good.
What a gorgeous voice.
This week, I sat with Brian Flynn in person for a no-holds-barred interview on his run for Congress, his business ventures, a family tragedy, activism, community service, and the donation of not one, but 2 living organs. All that and more from Brian's home in Elka Park, New York.
My name is Brian Flynn, and we are in the beautiful Catskill Mountains in Elka Park, New York, which is in the town of Hunter.
How did you find this house or this property? How did that all come about?
Like most things with me, it usually comes down to having too much to drink. So we came up to see friends up here who have been here for years, and they said, hey, we'd love to have you come up to the Catskills. And my father grew up coming to the Catskills, so I'd already heard about it as a kid. So we came to visit our friends right here in Elka Park, and it was a beautiful fall weekend. And we played tennis, we went hiking, they were having an afternoon barbecue and party. I said, oh my God, this is heaven. And again, maybe I had one glass of wine too many, but later on that evening, I had agreed to rebuild a Victorian house that had burned down about 3 or 4 years beforehand. This community is a community of about 20 homes, and they were all built around 1892. And so one of the homes had burned down, and I decided that I was going to rebuild a Victorian from scratch. And here we are.
It's a beautiful home. How long did the process take?
Well, I would run out of money every 6 months or so it took longer than it should have. And of course, building Victorians, they stopped building them for good reason, because everything's custom. So it took about 2.5 years, but it was well worth it. And Amy has all the taste, and she and our wonderful architect, Lynn Gaffney, did a beautiful job designing a home that on the outside looks much like the other homes. Even the paint is peeling now like the other homes in the area. But at the same time, the inside is much larger and doesn't have the small rooms that are reminiscent of Victorians.
What's this community like? It has a long history. What's it like living here?
It's magical. We were very lucky to have found it. A lot of the people were seasonal, and we decided to move here full time about 4 or 5 years ago after coming up on weekends. As my career evolved and I could work more from home and work remotely even before COVID. But now a lot of people are here full time as well based on COVID, but some of them have decided to stay anyway. What's great about it is the 20 homes share about 1,000 acres, which we have for hiking, and there's beautiful waterfalls, and there's tennis courts and a pool and all that. And there's also a bar and restaurant and a little area to have parties. So during the summer, it's 10 weekends of some sort of event every weekend. So from an Oktoberfest to a July 4th barbecue to black tie events, which are just a ton of fun. And our kids really loved growing up here. And now they both go to the local high school in town, which is a terrific school, and have developed great friendships outside of Elka Park in the greater Hunter-Tannersville area. So we lucked out and feel very fortunate.
First time we met was in 2017.
Uh-oh.
You and I and your wife, Amy, were cast members in the World War II Radio Christmas. And you played the Bing Crosby character, I think, or someone modeled.
Yes. They tried to have me avoid singing, which is a good idea. Everyone in my family can sing except for me.
That was at Phoenicia Playhouse, and you've done a few productions there.
Yeah, the Phoenicia Playhouse is another great little gem here in the Catskills. Amy's done a few shows there. She's directed shows there. I've done a few shows there. My favorite story was when Amy was doing Mamma Mia, and it was a Sunday morning. The matinee was at 2 o'clock, and one of the men in the play got sick and couldn't do it. The Phoenicia Playhouse, as you know, does not have understudies. So Amy volunteered me to learn the part in 3 hours and go on stage and do it. And they said, oh, it's community theater. You can carry your script. I said, I will not carry my script. I will learn the part and do it. And the gentleman who was doing it had chosen to do an American accent. The character is written as a British character, and I'm reading the lines. I said, oh, wait, he's from London. I said, oh, we changed that. I said, no, we're going back to that. So I affected a bad British accent and learned the part in 3 hours. And it was so great, and people were so generous in the audience and the other cast members as I was fumbling about on stage.
It's amazing. Great job.
Thank you.
Not having seen it, you did a great job. But you have a long connection to theater or community theater, being part of it, and you went to college, at least had a minor in it, right?
So I went to college thinking that I was an athlete, and I played tennis at Georgetown for 2 years, and then I blew out my knee during the summer between sophomore and junior year, so my tennis thing was kind of done. I wasn't very good anyway. So I'd always wanted to do theater, and I'd done a little bit when I was a kid, but in my family it was more about sports when I was in high school. And so I went to an audition for a role, and I didn't tell anyone, and I didn't know anybody in the theater department at the time, and it was for Equus. There's people playing horses, and they have costumes, and it's part of the whole conceit of the play developed by the playwright. And it's a terrific, terrific show. But I'm being very quiet, and I go in for my first audition ever, and it's of course, it's college theater, so people take it very seriously. And they walk in, and it's dark, and the director and the producer are sitting up in the audience, and they've got just a little desk light on. So there's just these voices in the dark telling me what to do. So I go in and I read for a few parts, and then they say, okay, Brian, there's some movement in this play. And I said, okay, I do movement. And they said, okay, well, we'd like to see how you move. I'm like, all right, great. What do I got to do? They said, okay, don't think about it. Just express through movement the birth, life, and death of a deer. So I thought, well, I don't even know who they are, and I got nothing to lose. So I did what was arguably probably a really bad and embarrassing version of the birth, life, and death of a deer. And of course, I got shot at the end to channel the Bambi situation. I did not get a part as a horse, but I did get one of the supporting lead, and I ended up minoring in theater and absolutely loving it, and did dozen-plus shows in my last few years at Georgetown, and developed great friendships from that. And so I've continued that passion. And a lot of it was reignited up here when we came to the Catskills, because it's actually hard to do community theater living in a city, but up here there's a more welcoming and forgiving audience, let's put it that way. So I've been able to reignite that passion.
I thought I saw some deer-like moves on that stage for World War II Christmas.
I was so embarrassed. It's so embarrassing.
Well, I had so much fun working with you on World War II Christmas that 5 months later, we went on tour together. I don't know if you remember this, but there were 3 stops on the tour: Troy, Liberty, and Oneonta. This was the Brian Flynn for Congress Medicare for All tour.
Yes, God, good memory.
So you were running for Congress against our soon-to-be one-term Congressman John Faso, and it was a crowded field. There were 7 of you running for that primary.
Yeah.
And this tour we did together, my only role was to run sound, was espousing the benefits of Medicare for All with a panel of highly knowledgeable doctors and experts. What made you throw your hat into that ring to begin with?
By the way, I'd forgotten we were on tour together. I have this image, of course, us going around in a tour bus, and staying up late,
it was
drinking.
Anticlimactic, wasn't
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
when I got to the...
When you got to what we did on tour. So I've always been involved in activism and been involved in politics, often as someone who either raised money or helped candidates. In fact, I helped Senator Gillibrand when she first ran in this area for Congress back in 2006, I guess it was. So all that activism and everything I'd done throughout my life, including advocating for Medicare for All since around 2004, I decided, okay, well, why don't I see if I could actually take it to the next step and put that passion that I had for it into action. And of course, I'm very type A, and I didn't just kind of dabble. I dove in. I quit my day job and went for it to see if I could make it. And then it ended up, the field kept growing and growing, and ended up being 7 people all of whom have become friends through the process. It was fun. They were like sparring partners and a bunch of talented people. And I can't tell you how excited I am that Congressman Delgado not only won, but he's won again, won his second term. And what's great about him winning is that I really believe he had the best sense of humor, because he would always laugh at my jokes first and most enthusiastically. And he's a terrific congressman and a great person.
Why was Medicare for All such a centerpiece of your platform?
I believe fundamentally that healthcare is a right, similar to a public education is a right, and something we value as a society, and something we should invest in and provide for. But in addition to that, as a business person, I can't stand the fact that we waste so much money and resources with the bureaucracy of health insurance and, honestly, the corruption of the health insurance industry. And I think that small business owners and entrepreneurs and individuals would have more power if they weren't relying on their employer for health insurance. And it's something that just is maddening to me. And in fact, I've set up a nonprofit once I stopped running for Congress that's exclusively focused on advocating for Medicare for All. And so we produce produce information and reports and just try to keep advocating for it, because in the end, I think we'll get there, but you really have to hasten it and move it along, because it shouldn't be that you're so tied to your employer. And it would be cheaper for everyone, it would be more efficient, and you'd get better health outcomes. So it seems to me that it's just the most rational. In addition to the moral aspects, it's also the most rational and the most economically beneficial.
And I can vouch because I listened to all three of those roundtable
Because you were on tour.
And I learned a lot. Is Antonio Delgado doing any of the things that you had hoped to do in that position?
Yeah, and he's doing them a lot better than I would have. He's very hardworking, and yes, I'm very hardworking as well, but he is better as part of a deliberative body. He does work extremely well with other people. I've been a president of a number of companies, and small and large, and I've learned through the process I'm actually not the most collaborative and deliberative person. I'm much more of a driver, and he has shown that he can get things done by working with others, by keeping his constituents in top of mind. So I actually think the skills that he brought to the table, in addition to his innate way of dealing with people, has made him really successful. So he is much better than I would have been.
I guess we'll never really know, though.
No, we will not. I like to say that people have spoken. I've learned my lesson.
Brian's political activism goes back to his college years when, in 1988, his brother JP was killed in the terrorist bombing of Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland.
Is it okay if we talk a little bit about your brother?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So your political activism goes back a long way. Did it start with Pan Am 103? And was that a motivation for you getting into activism, politics, or was it already in you?
My mother was an activist when I was growing up, so I had that model. She was always politically active even before she had kids. So I had that person to emulate. But I was 19 years old, and I wasn't very politically active as a 19-year-old when my brother was killed. I was a sophomore in college, and when it happened, I went from being the somewhat carefree college student, just doing what self-indulgent college students do, to all of a sudden being thrown into an international incident where I'm sitting in Lockerbie, Scotland, and my mother is yelling at Margaret Thatcher, and I'm trying to tell her to calm down, and she's saying that justice must be done. And I remember her sitting on the couch one night, we weren't getting a lot of sleep at the time, and I remember her speaking to a cabinet secretary. My son will not die in vain. We will find out who did this, and we will bring them to justice. And I remember saying, okay, well, this is our life now, and this is what we're called to do. And my sisters were younger, and my father took more of a supportive role. But I jumped right in with my mother, and I remember weeks later I was at a protest in front of the White House because they weren't releasing information. There was a lot of things that could have been done to prevent the bombing, and we actually lobbied to get them to establish a presidential commission, which did actually come out and definitively say that the bombing could have been prevented if the airline, Pan Am, had actually followed the security protocols that were already in place. So to have your brother murdered in an act of war, but also knowing that because of greed, it could have been prevented and it wasn't. All of those things, I guess, sparked an interest in me and kind of made me very passionate about getting involved and being an activist. And I was just talking to my kids the other day about, and it's a silly commercial from, I think it's Volkswagen. In life, there are passengers and there are drivers. And I think I learned, like my mother, that I am definitely a driver and need to do something about it and to be involved and to take a very proactive approach.
What came out of your activism at that time? So it led to improvements.
First and foremost, we were able to hold Pan Am responsible, and in fact, we helped drive them into bankruptcy because throughout the organization, we were able to prove gross negligence and willful misconduct, which is very difficult to prove. We were also able to establish new security protocols, many of which, if they had followed all the recommendations that we as family members and advocates had made, many of them would have prevented September 11th. We also lobbied to have the U.S. hold the states that sponsor terrorism responsible. So there were unilateral sanctions that were put on Libya when it was determined that they were behind the bombing, and in fact they indicted the bombers and the co-conspirators and eventually held Muammar Gaddafi responsible as well. That would never have happened without the legwork of the family members. And it went on for 20 plus years, our advocacy work. We had one guy in prison and one guy got off. And I remember sitting in Camp Zeist in the Netherlands when the verdict was read. And one of them was convicted, and I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal saying that, and remember this was February 2001, that we have to take seriously the threat of terrorism and not just put one guy in prison, but to hold the states that sponsor the terrorism responsible. And what will it take for us to take this threat seriously? Will it take another USS Cole, another Lockerbie, or something far worse? So a few months later, when September 11th happened, when people searched terrorism, my name came up. And in fact, I spent that day, September 11th, doing radio shows because I'd learned so much about terrorism and the threats that are out there, who could have been behind it and what could have been done to prevent it. So it kind of connected the two largest acts of terrorism against the United States were kind of woven together by those experiences.
And so that incident was a failure on the part of the airline and the government, and I guess multiple parties were partly to blame.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the TSA, for example, didn't exist before September 11th. We had suggested that. Prior to that, the airlines themselves paid for the security. So there was inconsistency in how it was delivered. The policies that we had suggested, like matching people to bags, doing background checks, all that stuff, if it had put in place, it could have prevented 9/11.
What was the biggest thing that Pan Am did wrong that you say would have prevented this from happening?
They were supposed to match interline bags. So these are bags that go from one airline to another, and they're supposed to match them to passengers, and that did exist, and they explicitly chose not to do that. They were supposed to hand check those types of bags, and they explicitly took the people off of that, even though they said they were doing it. They even put on a security fee because the threat of terrorism in the 1980s was pretty severe. They put on a security fee and never used that money to, in fact, do anything to improve security.
So you were a college student where?
Georgetown.
And your brother was at Colgate?
He was at Colgate, and he was part of the Syracuse program studying in London. He was on his way back for Christmas. It was December 21st.
I went to Syracuse in the mid-'90s and was aware of this largely through what they have now, which is the scholarship program.
Scholarship program, yeah, the Scholars Program, sure.
And each of the students, 35 students, your brother being one of them, led to a scholarship for 35 students every year.
Syracuse has done an incredible job. It's a great school, not just because you went there, but it was a great school even without you going there. And the administration there was incredible, such a great support network for the families and also the Scholar Program. So we often hear from the individuals who get the scholarship in his name. And it's just
great.
Such a great connection. And they've done just an excellent job. And it's a great institution.
Tell me just a little bit about your brother.
I love talking about him because he was the boy next door. He was the nice one. And there's only the good die young. And I remember when he died, I could even feel I remember being at a memorial service and people looking at me and I could see it in their eyes. I might have imagined this or projected this or whatever. But I was thinking, oh, right, of course, the nice one got killed. I've always been sharper edged than he was. He was the tennis coach and he was the basketball coach. He took care of the kids and was just really a sweet, sweet guy and would be a good mentor to other teens and everything. And so when he died, it was that sweet kid was the one who was killed. So that was really hard on the community, especially on my parents. And it also took me into a different light. I was a youngest child for 5 years before my sisters were born. I spent about 15 years as a middle child, and all of a sudden I was thrown into being an oldest child. And I was a much better middle child than an oldest child. That was a new role that I had to play. And I remember this very explicitly, that I was looking for a meaning or whatever, and I read in a newspaper a few days after he died that the principal of the school was talking about him. The Daily News had interviewed him, and he basically said J.P. Flynn was the type of man who would have made a difference. So then I took it that he was speaking to me, and that was what I was supposed to do, is not just be a self-indulgent college student, but figure out how I can make a difference in life. And that's kind of led to this constant nagging thing in my ethos that I have to do more to make a difference, and that's a good thing. For example, I still run a basketball program on Saturday mornings in the winter for some kids, and that's what he would have done. And so I was able to kind of keep his spirit alive and do that. And I absolutely love it. And I love, the whole thing. It's like 3 or 4 hours. Our whole family does it. And the kids come and they ref the games and all that. It's become a family affair where we go. And so I like the idea of keeping his spirit alive that way.
What's the importance of political activism, or at least civic engagement, for the every person?
It's funny. I wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review about whether you should talk about politics at work. A number of people were asked to write opinions, and I wrote that you should, because I think if people actually got more passionate about it and talked about it more, they'd feel more engaged and feel the ownership of it. Because I've always felt that it's easy to say, oh, I don't want to talk about politics, or to step away from it and say it's not healthy. And growing up in an Irish family, you can't go to dinner because the food is usually not that good. But the conversation and the debate and to use the expression from Ireland, the crack, it's amazing, right? So I remember you couldn't, especially with my mother, she was actually a successful extemporaneous speaker. Like, she had big trophies for winning extemporaneous speaking competitions. So you'd come to Sunday dinner and you better have had your arguments lined up. And I'm talking like 8, 9 years old. She would ask us questions, and she's very argumentative, understandably. And so she would pick fights, and she didn't even switch sides during a discussion in order to challenge you to hone and sharpen your arguments. So that type of sense of being involved and being engaged and then debating it and talking about it, it is an Irish tradition, but it's also become part of our upbringing. I'm not as good as my mother was at it, but I try doing it with my kids. But I think if you're not engaged and participating in your community, whether it's in a broad issue like Black Lives Matter, that you're a part of an issue that's nationwide and even global, or even just in your town about issues in your individual community, you really start to not be connected and not being part of something bigger than yourself. And that's always what drives me to it.
After the break, Brian's business during the pandemic, a double organ donation, and a peek at the horizon. This episode is sponsored by the Phoenicia Playhouse, a historic 150-seat community playhouse that's home to community theater, film screenings, local community events, road productions, and corporate meetings. The Playhouse is located in the beautiful hamlet of Phoenicia, New York. Find out more at phoeniciaplayhouse.com and on Facebook and Instagram. CatsCast is sponsored by the Central Catskills Chamber of Commerce, providing services to businesses, community organizations, and local governments in the Central Catskills region. Follow the Central Catskills Chamber of Commerce on Facebook and sign up for a weekly email of local events at centralcatskills.org.
So political advocacy, community theater, these things don't pay the bills. So it occurs to me that
especially if you've seen me in community theater.
But your Medicare for All platform may have come out of your, let's say, day job. So what do you do for a living, Brian?
So I've been an entrepreneur for decades, and it's very hard work. And I always tell people to say, I think I want to start my own business. And I always say, if you don't have to, and if there's anything else you can do and be reasonably happy, try that, because it's very stressful and it's very hard. And any entrepreneur would tell you that. But some people just can't do otherwise. So about in the late 90s, I started one of my first companies with some friends, and then it's been that way ever since. And I tried to go back and get a job in marketing in financial services after the dot-com bust. And I went in and I said, I really would love this job. I was very excited to have like a paycheck again and not have to worry about things. And they said, you're really qualified and we'd love to have you, but we think that as soon as your next entrepreneurial idea comes up, you're just going to leave. And I was like, no, really, I just want to go to meetings and I just want to be part of a team. And really, I don't want to do that anymore. And I didn't get the job. And there may have been other reasons, who knows. But I said to Amy, somebody burned the ships. I didn't, but somebody did, and I can't go back. So I haven't really had a traditional corporate job since the late 90s. One of the companies that I started was a business advisory firm with someone called Ed Schlossberg, and it was creatively named Schlossberg Flynn was the name of our company. And one of the companies I found was a medical device manufacturing company, and I helped stabilize and turn the company around and help figure out a growth plan, and eventually became president of that company. And we grew it from $20 million to over $100 million, and it was really fun, and it was a great experience, and there were great people working there, and I learned a lot of how my ability to drive things to completion can be used in that environment effectively to help lead people and to help keep them focused and to make a difference. So it was a great experience, and now I'm doing the same thing again. We've taken a company for around $10 or $12 million. We got involved in 2018, and now we're continuing to grow that. And we have 3 factories around the country that make medical devices, including test kits for COVID. So it's been a busy and challenging year for us, like it has for most people.
So you're a busy entrepreneur. You're politically active. You do a little community theater on the side.
Show tunes.
We went on tour. And then with all the extra time, you have quite the drive for, volunteerism, altruism. You and Amy. That seems to be an important thing for both of you.
Yep. Yes.
And then on the cusp of your 50th birthday, you thought, I can do more.
Yeah.
Tell me about the kidney you used to have.
So remember I told you earlier that whenever I have that second or third margarita, it leads to questionable decisions afterwards. But often they all work out. So I was out with a work friend, and I did have that third margarita. And I go back to my room and go to Facebook, and all of a sudden I saw a post from a friend of mine who was very sick. I didn't know this. And she needed a kidney. And it was all these comments in there. And I said, oh, my God, the poor thing. I had no idea. And I'm way down in the comments, like 164 comments. And I wrote, hey, I'm a universal donor for blood. Does that help for donating kidneys? And I didn't really mean it. So I closed the computer and I wake up in the morning and I noticed she responded to me and said, yes, it does. Here's the phone number to call to get tested. So I called and I got tested and eventually we were a match. And fortunately for me, her husband also was a match. And he just had to pass a test that he couldn't get past and eventually got through the test and ended up giving her kidney, and she's doing great. So that was terrific. So after I lose the primary election, after investing, a year and a half of my life, going on tour with you, I said, I really want to do something before I turn 50, and, I really don't think I've done enough in my life. Maybe it's survivor guilt since my brother died that, he would have done more or, I should do more, and it's just kind of bothering me, and I'm like, maybe it's like a midlife crisis. And so I said to Amy, maybe before I turn 50 and get too old, maybe I should get rid of that kidney. That was such a good thing. Maybe I should do that, right? And she said, whatever, dear. So 2 days later, she was on Facebook and she found a posting from a friend of ours whose brother, whom we didn't know, needed a kidney. And she forwarded it to me and said, looks like you have your chance to get rid of that kidney. So I go and I got tested and I was a match. And I had never met Greg, but I know his sister, Casson, was a teacher for our kids and a coach. So we were a match, and then they say, oh, well, again, someone else is going to do it, so we don't need your kidney. I'm like, great, I can't even do this. I'm on a Friday afternoon with Bo in the car. I said, see, Bo, I tried to do the right thing, but nobody wants it. The heck with it. And this lovely woman, she's Irish, Marion, here's her name. She's the donor advisor. I think they kind of typecast me. They said, oh, we'll put the Irish donor advisor with him because he'll fall for, and they were completely right. She could sell anything to me. Now, Brian, hi, it's Marion here. It says, I told you that we had another donor for Greg, but that donor fell through, So you'll be coming in for testing on Monday, you will. And I'm like, I just was telling my son that I'm out. She says, no, not that, Brian. No, you still want to do it, don't you? And I said, well, yes, of course I want to do it. So I went in, got tested, and we were going away for a vacation. And I said, am I allowed to go away? She said, yeah, but as soon as you come back, we'll get you suited. So it was actually the day before my daughter's birthday that they scheduled the surgery. And I met Greg for the first time before going into the surgery that morning.
And what was that experience like, donating the kidney? Fear, excitement?
I don't know if this is a common feeling about the experience, but my biggest fear was failing. I didn't talk about it to other people beforehand. I didn't want anyone to know about it because I didn't want to fail, because a lot of things can go wrong up until the point you actually go through the surgery. You can have a health issue. The recipient can have a health issue. So I was so anxious, not about the surgery or anything. I was anxious about failing and not being able to do something important and to help out Greg. So that was the anxiety I felt going in. And then you walk in and you go through the surgery, and then 5 or 6 hours later, you wake up, and my first question to Amy was, how's Greg? Because you're just worried about them, because you're fine, right? Your health is fine. Greg's really sick and needed this desperately. And she said, it's fine. It's working. It was very successful. And that moment, that feeling, it was just, the emotion was just incredible. We've been fortunate enough to have 2 kids, and that's a pretty powerful experience, to say the least. But this was something slightly different. And it was overwhelming. I said to Bo and Amy the next day, I said, I really think I'm changed by this. I really think I'm going to become, a person of light. And they're like, oh my God, the morphine is too much. They were just like, this is way too much. And because of that experience, I have become slightly less negative and less angry at the world and just a little more appreciative of every day and of other people. And it has made me maybe not quite a person of the light, but I've become less dark. Let's put it that way, from that experience.
You've gone on to have a nice relationship with the recipient.
Oh, Greg, yeah, he's a terrific guy. And since then, he's gotten married, he's got a new career, and he's like blossoming. Because since he was about 12 or 13, it was always about him being kept back by this kidney disease. So this was a big deal, just really. And he's got the best wife in the world. They are terrific. And he and I text and have become friends because of it.
That experience, as you say, made you, was it a man of light?
I'm a man of light. There it is. There it is. It happened. It took a long time.
And a man of light, of course, would do it again. So you can't donate a second kidney and live to tell about it. So what happened next?
Greg and I were texting one night. And again, see, this is the trend. I think I'd been out and had that second or third glass of wine. And I was thanking him. And, you get a little bit, sentimental and gushy about these things. And I was thanking him again for the honor to be able to help him because it's meant so much to me in my life. And he says, well, if it really was such a great experience for you, I hear you can give away your liver. Ha ha. And I read that and I said, you can? So then, of course, I looked it up and I found out you can. Living liver donations is a thing. And then I did the research. It's, 4 or 5 times more dangerous and it's not as common and it's a more serious process. But of course, being hyper competitive, I'm like, oh, it's harder? I got to do that. So then I brought it up with Amy and her first reaction was, why? Why would you want to do it? I said, well, because I think doing the kidney was great and a really good experience, and doing the liver and the kidney would be extraordinary. And how often in life do you get to do something extraordinary? And candidly, I finally found something I'm good at. Suffering and pain is that's what we do. And maybe it is just being Irish. It's just the millennia of oppression and suffering that we just don't let it go, and the martyrdom. But it was not that bad for me. I was able to recover quickly. And from the kidney surgery, I was back. Bo and I played in a tennis tournament 6 or 7 weeks after that. I was terrible. But I said, that was a pretty quick rebound. I said, I think I can do it. So she said, well, why don't you look into it? And so I contacted Marion again. And I said to her, Marion, here's a question. I don't know if anyone ever asked you this. Can you do both? And she said, I'm going to have to look into that. I've never actually had anyone ask that question, but let me ask. And she came back and she said, yes, we hear other people have done it. Is what she said. So I said, great. And she said, but the testing is very rigorous and it's a big deal and you should seriously do your research before you do it. So I went and did the research, and then I went, and the testing is pretty extensive. This is very different than the kidney. It's a 2-day battery of tests, including MRIs and CAT scans and everything, and stress tests and all these different things to make sure you can do it. And I went through all of that and then found out that I was a decent donor. I think it was August of last year that I found out, all right, you can do it. We just have to find someone. And they told me based on the shape of my liver, it would make more sense for me to give to a child than an adult. And they said, we actually don't have that many children, because a lot of times it's parents or relatives who want to give it to a kid. The old guy who needs a liver, not many people run to help them out. But children, it's often easier to get people to do living organ donations. And I said, oh, okay, well, maybe it won't happen then. So I go and I'm at work, and it was a very difficult time at work last year because of the pandemic. A lot of companies were struggling because you had trouble getting people to come to work. And we were making, as I said, COVID test kits, so we had to produce them. So it was really a difficult time. So I was on a Saturday, I was at work at one of the factories, and I got a phone call that I didn't recognize. And they said, hello, Brian. I said, yeah, wait, hold on. I'm on the factory floor. Let me step outside. Listen, this is Dr. Samstein. We have a match for you, and we have a child who needs your liver. It's a 4-year-old boy. And I'm thinking, they made that up because no one's going to turn down the 4-year-old boy. I'm like, it's not a 4-year-old boy. It's some old guy that needs it. I said, I don't believe it. And I said, okay, yeah, I'm in. This is what I said I wanted to do. This is fine. I mean, things are really busy at work. And this is late October. So you want to do December? I'll get my affairs in order, as they say. And he said, no, we don't have time. 10 days. We're doing it November 3rd. I said, election day? And he said, yes, so vote early and we'll see you on November 3rd. So I had to run around and do all the stuff at work, and I had to fly to New York. I was at one of our factories in the Midwest, and I had to fly to New York and do more testing. Then I had to fly to California for more customer stuff, and then back to New York. And I'm walking into the surgery, and because of COVID, they got very quick at getting you through the hospital, so there's not a lot of waiting around. And I get there at 7:30, and it had to have been maybe like 8:15. I'm in the operating room, and there's about 10 people in the room, and I'm about to get up on the table. You walk in because you're perfectly fine. And I had this moment of absolute panic. Like, what am I doing? Like, who does this? And it was just a moment of, this is the stupidest thing you're choosing to have them cut you open, do like all these incisions, And you didn't have to do this. What I just described was much longer than the moment was, but it was a panic. And what it said to me is that courage is not the absence of fear. It's just moving ahead even when there is fear. Then I said, okay, it's time for you to show just an ounce of courage. And it proves that I'm not delusional and I'm not crazy, because I realized the risks and I realized what I was doing and I realized that it was worth it. And in fact, you have to go through a psych evaluation in order to get approved for this. And the psychiatrist said, honestly, I was expecting to bounce you out of the process, because I said, this person's obviously crazy before I met you. And she met me and I explained to her that it's really rooted in the liberal, social, Catholic teaching, or the Jesuits who had been haunting me since college, of that you live for others. That's the point. And this was a manifestation of it, and that's why I was there. There was no other motive. There's nothing else. I'm lucky enough to have a very supportive family and very supportive business partners and colleagues who were like, okay, you need to take some time off to do this. That's fine. So I woke up in the ICU, and I was kind of hoping that the election would be over at that point. So basically, I sat there for 4 days watching CNN and MSNBC while I was recovering, and I was home by the Saturday when finally the election was called. So I made it home within 4 or 5 days.
And have you been in touch with this 4-year-old recipient?
So when it's completely anonymous like that, both parties have to agree to become not anonymous. And I said, I'm fine if they know who I am, if they're fine, vice versa. And they wanted to thank me and to show gratitude. And if they hadn't, that would have been fine too. We actually we imagined what we called him Timmy, because we might never meet him. And so we just imagined what he was like and what the little boy was like. And we were like, we hope Timmy's going to appreciate this liver. So they put you together, they connect you, and they send like written letters. This incredible family. And the little boy, Richie, he was at a central casting for this sweetest little boy who had a very rare liver disease that was fatal if they hadn't done it. And relatives had tried to get tested and they couldn't get anyone that was a match. And they told me the story afterwards, that all of a sudden they came to them and said, okay, so there's this 51-year-old man who wants to anonymously donate. And they're like, what? A 51-year-old? They're like, is it still work? Do livers work on people that old? I was like, I'm not that. I mean, really? And they were like, I guess. So I then had a chance to meet them in person about 2 months later. When I left the hospital a few days later, I was just so grateful. And it's interesting because the Man of Light thing didn't necessarily come back because they didn't use morphine. They used they didn't use a narcotic for whatever reason. They changed the protocols. So maybe I didn't have quite as much delusion or whatever. But afterwards, I felt just fortunate.
And your liver's going to fully regenerate?
Yeah, within the first 3 months, most of it that's taken out grows back. And I had a test recently, and most of it has grown back. And what they say is that sometimes it just stops based on what your needs are. So let's say they took out, 30%, but only 25% might come back because that's all the body needs. It's amazing. They still don't understand how the body knows to not continue growing or how to stop, but it seems to have worked. So I feel fine.
But you like margaritas and wine, so
I do.
It needs to grow back to its full capacity.
It needs to grow back to its full capacity. I like to think of it's a battle tested.
And that didn't matter in terms of donating it.
No. In order to donate your liver, you have to go through, as I said, the pretty serious physical battery of tests. They call my health, and it's what my kids call me, completely unremarkable, which is to say, like, I wear medium everything. I'm the most average medium person, and my health isn't great, but it's not horrible. I'm not in great shape, but I'm not in bad shape. I'm just medium, which in this case is a blessing and a gift. And one of the things that also haunts me is that we asked our mothers to speak at our wedding. And my mother chose to say, to those whom much is given, much is expected, at our wedding in front of hundreds of people, whatever, and use that as kind of the basis of her talk or whatever. And that is, in my case, I don't have a lot of money. As you know from community theater, I don't have a lot of talent. I have a lot of enthusiasm, and I happen to have very boring, unremarkable health, and that's something that I could finally win at. I learned afterwards that as far as people know, there are only about 50 people who have ever done both. And usually what happens is somebody who's given a kidney, a relative needs a liver, so they then say, okay, I'm going to step up and do this. As far as they know, they don't know of anybody who anonymously said, okay, now I'm going to do a liver as well. I was reticent in the beginning to speak of it because My reasons for doing it were my own, and I didn't post about it or talk about it or anything. It was only when New York Presbyterian asked if I would consider just talking more about it, because they're trying to encourage more people to consider being living donors. As I said, I did volunteer work, but it really has been this wonderful way of just giving your life some significance and giving yourself a sense of, all right, I've done something for somebody else.
Twice.
Twice. Yes, there's one more that I'm looking into, but I think I might be doing it alone, which is you can donate a lobe of your lung. I have no support from family members to do the living lung donation, so I don't think that's going to happen, but I have looked into it, and I think I'm going to get shut down. But it really is, as Amy said, perhaps it's turning into a bit of an addiction. Or maybe I should just let it go a little.
The rest of your organs are shaking in their boots.
I know. I have signed up for bone marrow, which is, by the way, again, rarely do they choose someone in their 50s for bone marrow, so that's probably not going to happen. But I am on the list and sent in my swab and everything, so we'll see.
So organs and tissues aside, what's next in general?
So someone said to me, would you run for office again? I said, no. I said, I scratched that itch. I actually learned that I wasn't great at it. I've got other ways that I can make a difference and be involved. So the organ donations, I've scratched that itch. Now I'm just looking for the next itch to scratch and what I can do to make a difference. And I haven't found it yet. But it has led me to be less haunted by the need to do the next thing. And it's kind of nice to not worry about that. I happen to love my work and be very lucky to have it, and very impassioned and engaged in building a business and working with people and creating jobs and flying around the country trying to solve problems and to build medical devices. So I like that, and I actually enjoy my kids. We actually learned during the pandemic and during a lot of the isolation we were doing, we actually like our kids, and it's led to us become much, much closer. And even me doing the donations, they're much more proud of what I've done since running for Congress than when I was running for Congress. I probably need to work on my humility, but in order to be a really good politician, you have to be solicitous. And I'm not very good at that. It's a big part of it. And some people it comes naturally. Their charisma, it manifests itself that way. And they're very good at bringing people in and making them a part of it, whatever. I found I wasn't very good at that. I'm much more of the angry activist who's wants to charge the hill and solve the problem that way, rather than be someone that's going to, collaborate and work together and do that. So I said, all right, so rather than try to morph myself into being a really sweet, nice person, I decided I'm just going to play to my strengths and see what that brings. So who knows?
Well, you had me fooled all along. Sweet guy.
Well, it's funny.
Child-sized liver for some reason, but... So your porch is getting cold, and we'll wrap this interview up. I just want to come around full circle here. We started with what brought you to the Catskills and to this home. What keeps you here?
Oh, definitely the sense of belonging and a sense of community. For example, Amy is the chairperson of the local Economic Development Foundation, the Hunter Foundation. She and the people there do great work in building a strong community here. My kids just love the school. We love playing sports, and we were just talking with somebody who works at the school about this great game we had last winter where the boys varsity had this big upset win out in Edmundston. And that type of connection to a community, and being able to go into a restaurant here in town and not only know the owners, but know most of the people sitting. We're lucky to have that. I encourage, and now the way people's careers are, you can work more remotely and do all that. I'm pretty excited that we have this place to continue the next journey and have a place that our kids can continue to come back and visit. I do hope they leave soon for a while. And they're welcome to come back, but they should leave.
You'll appreciate it here a lot more when they come back.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Brett.
Cat's Cast is a production of Silver Hollow Audio. This episode was edited by our production intern, Sky Roos. Please be sure to subscribe wherever podcasts are found and give us a rating to help other listeners find us. Until next time, you can find us on Instagram @CatsCast. I'm Brett Barry. Thanks for listening.